Hi and welcome to Squizz.com, the connected marketplace. Today I'll be showing you the latest changes we've made to the Squizz.com connector in the 1.22 release. The Squizz.com connector is a free piece of software developed by us that allows a business to connect any of its business software, databases, spreadsheets or files storing data into the Squizz.com and TOTECS platforms, allowing businesses to save and make more money by automating data management, transfer between its systems and other supplier and customer systems. Now you understand what the connector can do, let's look at the changes we've made to the 1.22 release. This release adds a new data export allowing the connector to update currency exchange rates from third-party exchange websites and banks with connected e-commerce platforms. This allows the connector to update these rates in websites hosted on the TOTECS platform, which may help supplier businesses to show product pricing to overseas customers in their own local currency. In the generic adapter, we've added a preset that allows the currency exchange rates to be exported from exchangeratesAPI.io, a free online web service that allows rates provided by the European banks to be exported to connected e-commerce platforms. This new feature makes it easier for businesses selling to international customers to localize pricing to their expectations while still being able to manage pricing in a local currency. This release adds a new routine to the generic adapter to be able to reconcile and send invoices to customers who have connected their business systems in the Squizz.com platform. This routine will go through and look at any sales orders in the connector and try to find linked invoices in their organization's own connected business system. For any matches it finds, it will send the invoice across to Squizz.com, allowing the invoices to be sent onto the customer's own system. This routine helps automate the invoicing processes for supplier businesses, and using Squizz.com allows invoices to be sent automatically onto the customer systems without having to know which system the customer is using. This can greatly save time and money for supplier and customer businesses. This release adds a number of improvements to the generic adapter's JSON, XML, CSV web service file data source type to now support saving the data retrieved from a third-party web service to files saved locally on the connector's computer. This has multiple benefits, one being to be able to save and read from the same data across multiple data exports using the one generic adapter, as well as being able to aid in diagnostics and being able to see the data being retrieved from a web server at a specific time. If there's multiple pages of data, each of these pages can be saved with a different file name, and then the generic adapter can be used to read all the files that start with a given name. Additionally, in the generic adapter, improvements have been added to allow the JSON, XML, CSV data source type to read JSON data that starts with an array objects within its data. The generic adapter also gets a new encrypt JSON, XML, CSV field function, allowing data to be encrypted using the RSA signing ciphers, which may be required when authenticating or trying to obtain data out of systems such as Xero's online accounting software. The connector now supports being able to export out category, attribute, and make model data to the Squizz.com platform. When this data is imported against an organization in Squizz.com, it can then allow people connected to the organization to search for the organization's products using category, attribute, and make model searching. Additionally, because this data is hosted on Squizz.com, it allows businesses connected to the organization to download this category, attribute, and make model data, allowing it to be shared between customer and supplier systems, making it easier for catalogs to be shared around computers in a standardized way. Within the connector application, a ribbon menu has been added to the sales order detail window. This makes it easier to view the different details of the sales order. New options have also been added to the window to be able to add and remove lines, surcharges, and tax code to the sales orders as well. A ribbon menu has also been added to the JSON, XML, CSV Query Browser, making it easy to query files or web services that store data in JSON, XML, or CSV spreadsheet data format. In the connector application's adapter export routine schedule window, there is now the ability to filter historic logs based on data type or status. This makes it easy to see if different types of data were successfully sent to connected e-commerce platforms and how often certain data was successfully transferred. For adapter customer account data exports, the timeouts have been increased to 15 minutes to allow more time for account data to be exported to connected e-commerce platforms. Additionally, the categories and product attributes data exports have also had their timeouts increased to 10 minutes, allowing for slower connections and larger sets of data to be transferred from one system into the Squizz.com and TOTECS platforms. Lastly, across all adapters, the customer accounts data export now has a phone field, allowing a primary contact phone number to be exported out with other customer data to the appropriate systems. As always, feel free to subscribe to the Squizz.com YouTube channel to stay informed when we release great new functionality into the future. For now, let's look in more detail at the great new features we've added to the connector. Within the 1.22 connector release, we've added a number of improvements to the sales orders features within the connector application. We'll click on the sales orders tab, and then we click on the order number of a given sales order. Within the sales order detail window, you'll now see that it now has a ribbon menu at the top of the window to allow you to more easily navigate between the different sections of a sales order. So if we click on the addresses, that will show us the details of the billing and delivery addresses assigned to the order. Click on the lines, we'll see all the lines. And if we click on the surcharges menu button, we'll now be able to see all the details of the surcharges. Besides this, we have also added new improvements to be able to add new lines and new surcharges to an order. So if we click on the add line button, that will take us to the line screen. And then from there, we can then fill in the details of a new line. So lines can have different types. So we can either have a product line, a text line, a label line, or a download line. So normally, if we were purchasing an actual product, we would then create a product line and we would put in the code of that product. Or we can put in any details of the product, so we might be buying some kind of box. And then we can put the unique identifier of that product within our system that it needs to be imported into, so it might have a number of 1, 2, 3. And then we can put it in the description. Besides that, we can then fill in the rest of the details of the line, such as pricing, the dimensions of the products, the location that it may need to be specifically sent to, any kind of additional details of the purchase order, where the sales order is linked to, as well as we've got taxes and attributes and deliveries. So if we click the save button, that would then add a new line to the sales order and it will appear now in the lines, and that has now been saved. Now besides that, we can also add new taxes to the line as well. So if we click on the add tax button, we now need to put in the identifier of the tax code. So we might have a GST tax code that might have the same unique identifier, the key tax code ID, as the tax code itself, and then it might have a longer label such as goods and services tax. We can set the rate of that tax, so that would be a 10% tax if it was in Australia. And then the price of that tax, we need to set that, and the quantity of the product that tax applies to. So if we're buying one of these products, then you would expect to see the same one quantity there as well, and we can set the total price of that. And once you make these changes, you then need to click the save button for them to be saved against the order. Besides that, we can also delete the tax from the order line as well by clicking the delete button and confirming that we want to delete that tax. That's another improvement that we've also added into the sales order details window here. And if you want to delete a product line, you can just click on the delete button here, click the confirm there, and then that will remove it from the order. For the order details and the address sections, if you make changes here, such as putting in a postcode here, you need to click on the save button for those changes to be updated within the order. And same for the order details. Any changes made here would have to click on the save button for those changes to be reflected if we click there. But for the lines, as soon as you click the save button, the delete buttons, that will change the order, so you don't have to click the save button for those actions. And the same occurs for surcharges. We now have the ability to add new surcharges. So we click on the add surcharge button, that then clears the form and then allows us to create a new surcharge. So we may have a credit card surcharge, and then you would fill in the rest of the details of how much that surcharge was costed as. So that might be a $10 credit card surcharge, and then it has a tax of $1 included in that to make it $11. So as soon as we click the save button, they'll add that credit card surcharge to the list of surcharges in the order. And with every surcharge, we can also add taxes as well that may be applied to that. So there's the improvements to be able to add, modify, and remove lines to sales orders, as well as add, remove, and update surcharge lines, as well as add, update, and delete taxes from both lines and surcharges. So these changes should make it easier to be able to modify details of orders, which may be required before those orders are allowed to be imported into a specific system, or it could also be used to further refine an order before it is submitted into its system, because then changes may need to be applied to that order before they are allowed to be accepted. As well as these can be used for both diagnostics and testing purposes. Within the 1.22 connector release, we've added improvements to the JSON XML CSV Query Browser. So if we go into the connector application, click on the Tools menu, and then click on the JSON XML CSV Query Browser. Once we open it up, we can see that the Query Browser now has a new ribbon menu that allows us to more easily configure the Query Browser to be able to query data from the different locations and the different data types that the Query Browser supports. Previously, we had a drop-down where all these options allowed you to choose where you wanted to get the types of data you wanted to query and the location where that data is. Now, instead, you've got these options separated out. So the first thing we need to do is choose what kind of type of data we want to then query. So we might want to querying JSON data, XML data, or CSV spreadsheet data. Once we've chosen our data type, and that's the data that's coming back from the location where we're going to retrieve that data from, We then need to choose where is that location of that data. Is it being stored on a file? Is it being stored over the internet? And then we need to make a HTTP request to retrieve it over the internet. Is it stored within the raw data tab, or is it stored within the HTTP request body tab here? Well, now we're going to choose to get the data from a file. We click on the locate button. And then we choose the file, which is storing that data. And we look at that file. In this example, we've got some currency exchange rates, which are stored in this file in a JSON formatted string. And then after that, we then need to configure the JSON record set path to find out where each of the records we want to query out are. So I've gone through and set up the record set path. So it's going to get all the records from this rates object. Then we then set the fields that we then want to query out for each record that's going to be retrieved from that path. Click the run button. Now you see all the data that was stored in that file that we're requesting out. So in this case, it's showing us exchange rates from one currency to another. That's what this data supports. That shows you how you can then retrieve data from files. If you want to use a HTTP request, click the HTTP request button, and then that will then disable the file path text box and instead enable all the HTTP request settings. So in this case, we're going to go over the internet, talk to this web service that contains that domain, and then we're going to retrieve back the data and click the button again, and you'll see that the same kind of data, which I previously saved in the file, is now being retrieved across the internet. And we can click the raw data tab. It will show us the data that's been stored. Now, if we then click the raw tab, then now it's going to read directly from this tab, and it's data there. So we click that, and that will run. And if we had data in the request body, we would then click that button there. So let's just take that raw data. If this was left empty, edit will fail, as you can see here. So we'll put some data into there, and now it's successfully reading the data out again. So that shows you how to use the query browser to read JSON data out. And if we're using XML data, then all we need to do is change the data type and reconfigure all the fields here based on the XML, which was, when it's queried out, will be converted into JSON, and we can use the same settings here to be able to then retrieve the data that's stored in the XML format, and the same for the CSV file format. If you want to learn more information about how to read from CSV files, then look at the 1.20 connector release, which shows you all the details of how you can query data out of CSV spreadsheet files. As well as that, we've got an extra section in the ribbon to find the documentation, so you can find documentation on how this query browser works. And if you click on that, that will then open up a web browser where you can then find more details about how the query browser works and what all the settings, the values that they need to be set for those settings are. And if we click on the JSON XML CSV field functions button, that will take us to the documentation on all the different functions that we can embed within the data fields here to be able to manipulate the data that we're being querying out. So in that documentation, it goes into details what all these different functions are, as well as examples of how to use those functions to get the data that you're looking to retrieve. In our example here, we're using many different functions. We're using replace functions, substring functions, parent node functions, if functions, to be able to then do some smarts on the data that we are ultimately then displaying in the result set here. So we're joining data together that was previously separated, in this case, to create unique identifiers for currency exchange records. That is just one example of many examples that you can use the query browser for to be able to do some very smart things when you're wanting to query out data and configure the connector to be able to retrieve data for given systems that the data needs to go into. Within the 1.22 connector release, we've added a new data export to the connector that allows currency exchange rates to be retrieved from a given system, then be pushed across into the e-commerce systems, beginning with the TOTECS platform. In our generic adapters here, if we click on this Mo adapter I've got here and click on the settings button, within the settings window, if we click on the data exports tab and click on the export type dropdown, within there is a new data export called currency exchange rates. So this data export gets the exchange rates from one currency to another currency. So if we click on the data fields here, you can see that there are different fields to get different details of both the buying currency and the selling currency. In this example here, you can see that we've hard-coded in the fields that we're going to get all the currencies to do with Australian dollars, and then we're going to see what is the conversion rate into the currency being purchased. For example, we might have US dollars, euros might be another, and so on and so forth. And the important part here is the exchange rate field that determines the actual rate that it costs to convert one currency to another. So every currency exchange rate record needs to have a unique identifier called the key currency exchange rate ID. And once we've got that unique identifier, then these exchange rates can be imported into the relevant e-commerce system. In the generic adapter, we've made this easier to configure by being able to integrate in with one example web service that stores these currency exchange rates called currency exchange rates API.io. So if we go to it, the website here, we can see the details of this web service on the internet that provides these exchange rates. And this web service gets its exchange rates from the European Central Bank. So it's pulling the data from the European Central Bank and making it available through its website. And then from there, we can then download it from that website using the Connector's generic adapter and then push it to our relevant system. This is a mostly free web service. As long as you play within their limits, then you'll be able to retrieve this data free on an ongoing basis. But if you hit the web service hard, then they may request that you pay for that stuff. So you can find all the information about this usage, but we have already pre-configured the Connector's generic adapter so you don't have to do this work. So if we choose that preset, the currency exchange rates API.io preset, and click on the load button, you'll get an option whether or not you want to override any exchange rate data export settings by clicking on the yes button. Within the adapter preset data hook settings window, you have to configure which currency is your base currency. So if your system that stores product pricing is in Australian dollars, then you need to put its ISO currency code in here. So AUD is the currency code for Australian dollars. But if you had your pricing in United States dollars, then you put USD instead. So we have to put that code there and then put the label of that currency to match that as well. You click the Save Settings button. So that will then create a new data source, and you can see here called the exchange rates API.io. And if you click on the Modify button, you can now see it is automatically set the domain of that web service and the data type to make sure that we can do that, as well as a testing connection to be able to get that data as well. Now, if we go back to the data exports, you'll see that the URL is set to the endpoint that allows us to retrieve the rates. And you can see that the base currency is now set to AUD, and that setting came out from that preset settings window previously. So that's saying that we want to get all the rates based on the Australian dollar currency. This preset has also configured all the buying and selling fields, and you can see that it also placed those settings that we set previously into these fields here. If we click on the test export query and we click on the run query, all the different rates that have been pulled out of that web service. So you can see for Australian to Canadian dollars, so 1 Australian dollar costs 90 Canadian cents. And then for the next one, 1 Australian dollar costs 5.39 Hong Kong dollars. And we can see that for the list. So this web service doesn't provide every single currency in the world. It only provides the currencies that the European Central Bank has provided to it. So which is quite a few here. Most of the countries that are major players across the world, you'll be able to get the exchange rates from. But just as easily configure the currency exchange rates data export in the generic adapter to get it from a different web service. It could be some kind of foreign exchange, or it could be a bank that provides these rates as well. So it's up to you to choose what is the most appropriate place to get these rates. Now, if we go back into the adapters and we click on the export routines, we can now see that there is an option to export the currency exchange rates, and there is the ability to export that out to the TOTECS platform. We click the Run Once Off button, and then those exchange rates will get updated within the configured TOTECS platform project that we have set up for that adapter. Then that system can use these currency rates, such as if they want to show pricing in local currencies for different international customers, and that makes it easier for the customers. Now we can also schedule this to run on a periodic basis. So we click on the export currency exchange rates and click on add to schedule. Say we wanted to update the currency exchange rates in TOTECS on a regular basis, such as a daily basis, then we just set the frequency to 1 day. And then we could then optionally, if this fails, we could send out an email and we would put a full to get all the currency exchange rates to update and click the add button. Now what that will do, that is going to be run on 1:14 p.m. on the 31st of July, and then after that runs, it will be rescheduled to then run on the next day, which would be then the 1st of August, and it will continue to run every single day that the connector host service is running. Now before that changes takes effect, we need to click the reload scheduler to make sure that it does get scheduled in to start then running. By setting this up in the scheduler, we can now automate the currency exchange rates so that they update our rates in our corresponding e-commerce platform at a set period every day. So we no longer then need to manually set those currency exchange rates in those relevant systems. So this data export is very useful for when businesses are selling to international customers across multiple countries, and those foreign exchange rates may need to be used in order to determine the prices that customers may see, among other features and functionality that those e-commerce platforms may use with the currency exchange rates provided. Within the 1.22 connector release, we added the new ability to be able to import categories, attributes, and make model data into the Squizz.com platform. So those features have now been supported by Squizz.com, and through the connector we can now get the data in. If I click on the Datasets tab within the connector, I've set up a dataset that contains the data that we may want to import into Squizz.com. So clicking on the View button, that brings up the dataset here, and in my example here, I have a company called the Donut Factory, and they sell a whole bunch of different donuts, bagels, different buns, and baked goods. So as we can see here, we've got 8 products, and under the Categories tab, I've created some categories for each of these products, as well as I've assigned the products to these categories here as well. So we could set up this category data in anywhere. We don't have to use datasets. We could use it within our accounting or ERP system, or within spreadsheet applications such as CSV files or ODBC compatible databases. So for example, I've got the data here, and I now need to upload this into Squizz.com to allow customers and suppliers to be able to see this data. So if I click on the adapters and settings messages again, I've configured this adapter called the Donut Factory to be able to talk to Squizz.com. So I've configured the API settings to allow this adapter to talk to Squizz.com. And now, once that's been set up, and I've set up within this generic adapter, I've set up the categories data exports, the attributes data exports, and also the make model data exports is to get the data from the most applicable location where it's stored. So in our case, we're getting the category data from the dataset, and I've configured a dataset adapter here to read through that file. After clicking on the exports and routines buttons for that adapter, I can now select on the categories data export and choose the Squizz.com e-commerce platform, set the data transfer mode to full to import all that data, and click the run off button. Now what will happen is that all the data will be retrieved from the dataset, and then it'll be uploaded to Squizz.com. So if I go into Squizz.com once I'm logged in, and I go to the Donut Factory Organizations profile, clicking on the admin button, I can then see under the data section that there are 2 sections here that we care about, the category trees and the category data. The category tree, by default, every organization within Squizz.com gets a default category tree called categories, and it has a key category tree ID left to blank. And then if I click on the categories, we can now see the categories we imported from the dataset are now appearing in Squizz.com. So there's all of our categories, and they're linked together. We can click on the detail button then to view those categories there as well. Once we've got our category data in, as well as our product data, we can then click on the products tab, and now we can see our category data being able to be navigated through. So I've set it up so that once you click on the donuts category, you can see all the products assigned to that category. So we have 3 different kind of donut products, but I've also created subcategories for each of these different colors. So I can go into there and I can see that product again. So the product can be assigned to 2 different categories. This pink donuts is assigned both to the more general donuts category as well as to the more specific pink donuts category, and same for the blue donuts category there. And I did the same for the buns and the bagels as well. So there's the buns and bagels, and then I broke this up into further subcategories called white buns and multigrain buns. You can see the products. So that's an example how you can import data now into Squizz.com, and that data can then be used by customers then to find products more easily and available and see the details of those products that they're looking to purchase. And this data is not just available within the Squizz.com organization profile. Clicking on the organization menu, and then we can go into the customer accounts for the Donut Factory organization. And when we click on a customer account within the products tab, we can now search by categories, and we can see those same categories available there, but this time they also have pricing based on the pricing available for this customer account. So we can know exactly how much these products now cost, as well as we can navigate through the category tree there. So that's how we import category data, and it's very similar for the attribute data as well as for the make model data. So if we go back to the connector, all we need to do is change the data export that we want to export data. So we want to get all the product attribute data that allows us to then provide any additional information about products. So looking back in the dataset, clicking on the attributes tab, I've created 2 profiles here, one called color size, and the other one's called donut attributes. So for those 2 profiles, I then set up some attributes for them. So the color size has naturally a color attribute and a size attribute. And then the donut attributes are more specific to donut kind of products. So in this case, we've got an attribute here called contains sugar and is gluten-free. So if we then go to the product attribute values tab, I've put in values here against those different attributes. So for the pink donuts, we can see the color there, and the size is there as a medium. And we can see for these products, pink and blue donuts contain sugar, whereas they are not gluten-free, but the third product, the yellow donuts, is both gluten-free and does not contain sugar. So that's how we can put in more information about those products. So with that done, we go back to Squizz.com, we should see the attribute data now imported into Squizz.com. So we click on attribute profiles. We'll now see those two profiles I was talking about, and we can go then and view all the attributes that have been assigned against them. And if we wanted to go into products, we can also view the attributes assigned against the specific products. Attribute data is another piece of data that we can use in order to help search for products and allow customers to see more information about those products. The last data export, if we click back on the exports routine, we can now import both the makers, the maker models, and maker model mapping. So we click on makers, we'll make that a full import, and we'll choose Squizz as well. We'll run that. When that's completed, so if we click on makers, we can see here's all the different manufacturers or makers that I've imported in from the connector. So we've got Toyota, which is car company, same with Holden and Yamaha, whereas Apple is a phone manufacturer company as well. And then if we go back into here, we can click on maker models, click that to import the maker model data. So that's all the models that these different manufacturers produce. So we can see here, Apple, for instance, makes the iPhone 8. And then we can click on that to view the details that we imported from the connector, which came from our connected data source. And the same goes for the maker model mappings. We can import those in as well. That provides the links between categories, products, and models. So it's important to note that there are dependencies in which the order in which this data is imported into. If you want the categories to be assigned to products, then you must first import the product data into Squizz.com first. And products also has dependencies on price levels and tax codes. So you need to import them first before you import the product data. And then you should then be able to import the category data, ensuring that your products get assigned to categories. And for the make model data, we need to import the manufacturers first before we try to import the models that should be assigned against those makers. Then you'll be able to import the make model mappings, allowing the categories and products to be assigned to the given models, as well as the attribute data associated with that. And the product attributes is a similar situation where we need to import the products first before we try to import the attribute data. Otherwise, the attribute values will not get assigned to products. So this is more functionality that Squizz.com is making available, and we can use the connector to easily get that data in where it needs to go against an organization within Squizz.com. Within the 1.22 connector release, we added a new capability to do with data exports for any data adapters to more easily be able to search the history of data exports that have occurred. If I take my previous example where we're importing category, make model, and attribute data into the Squizz.com platforms, if we click on the exports routines buttons for that adapter, if we click on the history log tab here, there are now new filters to be able to search through the history of the data exports that have occurred. So if you've got many different data exports occurring, because there is quite a long list of data that can be exported to different e-commerce platforms, we now have the ability to filter through that history, and this may be helpful to determine when something may be successfully happening or when a certain type of data is failing. You have these filters here to be able to then more quickly find the history of these data exports running. So if I take an example, previously I just ran a data export for categories. I can click on that export and click filter, and we'll see all the occurrences of when that previously ran. So as we can see here, the last two times it successfully ran, the time before that it had failed, and it failed importing data into Squizz.com, and then we can view the details of why that failure happened. So in this case, there was incorrect credentials set up for that adapter. We have that filter there. You may want to further refine this search to go, I want to only find failures that have occurred for this specific type of data, or you might want to see any failures that have occurred for any data export, so then we can then filter that way. And at the bottom of this list will be any routines that are set up for this adapter, so you can filter them out as well. In this case, none have been set, but it's just a case of finding the name of that routine and then filtering it down like that. So these filters should make it much easier and quicker to be able to diagnose and determine if or if not data is exporting the way it should be for that given adapter. While we're here, we've also made improvements to the customer accounts data export. We've now increased the timeout up to 15 minutes. That means when we click the run button and then try to export it to any of the e-commerce platforms or the data sets, it allows up to 15 minutes before the connector will abort trying to import that data and give up expecting a response and report it as a failed attempt. So if I click on the run once off button, this is now allowed to take up to 15 minutes. That should give plenty of time for this export to now run when you've got tens of thousands of customer accounts in your accounting or ERP systems or wherever that data is coming from. It gives it much more time for that export to complete. And we've also increased the data exports for the contracts as well as the product attributes from just over 3 minutes to now up to 10 minutes, so it gives it more time for those exports to also complete as well, ensuring that data, when it is being exported over a slow internet connection or a lot of data is being exported, it gives it more time for those exports to complete. Within the 1.22 connector release, we've modified all adapters that support exporting customer account data to now include a phone field in that data being exported out to the e-commerce platforms. So if I take an example here, I've got the donut factory here is an organization. We have an adapter set up to export its customer account data out. If we click on the settings button and go to data exports and go to the customer accounts data export, click on the data fields, you'll now see that there is now a phone field that is available from the list of fields where we can then assign that field to a location. In this case, we're getting this out of a spreadsheet CSV file that stores a phone number field. So this allows us to include a phone number, which would be the primary contact phone number of a given customer account, such as if they were a customer, your accounting staff may use this phone number to call that business up, or it could be a general phone number for that given customer, organization, or person. So if we go to all the different adapters, such as my retail manager here, and go to its customer accounts data export, you'll also see that the phone field is available there. And if we did the same process across all the different adapters, whether it be SAP Business One, the Micronet distribution adapter, AccountWrite, now has a support for enabling that phone field, and then it is simply just matching up that phone field to the most appropriate location where the phone data is stored against a customer account in those systems. Within the Connector's 1.22 release, we've added a new improvement to the generic adapter for any of its data exports that are configured to download data from a web service and then export that data out. There's now the ability to save the data that's been downloaded from the web service to a file on the computer's file system first before exporting that out. That has a couple of benefits where we can then view the data that's been downloaded from a web service, and we can then use that data in other exports. So we can share the data around, and that will reduce the amount of requests we make to web services. So if we take our demo adapter here that I've got configured in the connector, application, and click on settings. Within the settings window, under the generic tab, I've configured a JSON XML CSV web service file data source type that will connect to the Squizz.com API, and if we look at the settings of that web service, that will download data from the API of Squizz.com. Under the data source session create, that is configured to download data from a specified organization that exists on the platform. So in this case, this organization has an ID, and that will be our supplier, and we're going to get product data from that supplier. In this case, that supplier is the donut factory. There's the ID, the same ID that we saw, and we're going to download its product data. As we can see here, all the products that organization has, and then we can then save the data that we're downloading to a file on the file system. So back within the connector, I configured the products data export. It's going to get the data from that supplier. I've also put in data hooks here to restrict the amount of records that are being retrieved per page. So in our data source, we configured it to only get 3 records per page, and because of that, this data export needs to make multiple requests in order to get the entire list of products from the donut factory organization. So a new setting that has been added to the generic adapter here is this setting here called Save HTTP Response Data to Folder. So this is where we have to specify the folder that we want to save the data coming out of a web service to the local computer. So if I click on the Locate button, I've created a folder here called Downloaded Product Data. And in here, I'm going to put in the name of the file that I want created when the data is downloaded from the web service. So in this case, I'm downloading products, so it makes sense to set the file name as products. And we can also put in a hook here called page number. If there are multiple requests made to a web service to get each page of data to make up an entire result set, we can now put in this data hook, and this will get replaced with the page number being requested to retrieve that data. Now this data coming from the Squizz web service is in the JSON data format, so I'll give that a JSON file extension, and we'll click the save button. So now what's going to happen is when this export runs, it's going to then look at this directory, and it's going to create one or more files called products, and then that page number hook will get replaced, and then allows that data to be saved before then the data will be processed, all the records will be found, and the data will be exported out to the corresponding e-commerce system or the data set. So I click on the button to save those settings. Now we're back in the connector application. I'm going to export this product data from Squizz.com to a data set called Demo2. So when we run this, we go into the exports and routines. For that adapter, scroll down, choose the products data export. and we'll choose to save that to the dataset that I've got configured up. And we'll put that into the demo2 dataset. Click the Run Once Off button. With that now completed, and if we look at the history log, and that's successfully completed, then if we go into that directory, we can see that 3 files created by the products data export that we configured, and here's all the data that we had downloaded. So if we can click on them and view them in a text editor, we can now see all the data that was downloaded for that specific page of records. And if we prettify that data, we can see the different information available for those products for that page that we downloaded. So this was a bagel product that we had downloaded from the donut factory, and we can see the details of some cell units there, some information about the name of the product. So this is a blue donut. We can see the widths and heights of it, whether or not taxes are included in its pricing by default, and other information. So that's the first page of data. And then we can go into the third page and see all the data that was produced there, prettify, and then we can see the 2 or 3 records that may be available there. So using the data that came from these 3 files, we can now configure other data exports to read from these and do things with the data that's available from these files. So we may only make one request for one data export to actually download and retrieve these files, but then we can use other data exports, maybe 5 or 10 different data exports, to reread the same data. So this, what it means is it reduces the amount of requests that we need to make to the web service to retrieve the data and do more things with it. If a web service is very slow to download data, let's say one of these pages took, say 5 minutes to download, then we could potentially save a lot of time when we got lots of data exports using the same data. And many web services do provide multiple sets of data within one list that is being exported out. This is the power that this new improvement to the generic adapter brings. Now we can also test this out in the query browser. So if we go into the tools and go into the JSON XML CSV Query Browser, in this case, if we look at the files that we're downloading and we put a star character into the file path, it will try to read from all those files that were previously downloaded by our generic adapter. But we just need to configure all the other settings for this data export. Such as I got here, I set up the dataset path to find the records and then find each of the fields of the JSON objects that gets retrieved out of these files. If we click the Run Query button, you can now see the full result set that has been obtained for the product. So we can see the full list of products that was obtained across the 3 files that were previously downloaded by the generic adapter. So this provides us a way to query out lots of data that are spanning multiple files, and then we can do stuff with that data by configuring the generic adapter to read from it. So in this case, we might write some code that says, well, we want to use the barcode, or maybe we want to use the brand field from a certain product, and we could configure a category data export, then to use the brand field to generate a brands-based category tree. And that is just one of many things that you could do with the data coming out. Now, there's one important point to note. If you've configured a data export to be able to save the data it's retrieving from a web service to the files, that you may get a situation where, say, a page of data fails to download, and then because of that, the entire result set is not completely downloaded. And what will happen is the connector, it will put this file here called data files incomplete lock. So if this file exists in the directory where the data export data is being saved to, then that denotes that this data is incomplete, that it hasn't been downloaded in its entirety. So in other words, the connector is saying this should not be read from because it is incomplete data. So when this file exists, the data export, if it contains this file, then it will report back an error saying it cannot read from the directory or the files that are stored, the data stored in these files, because there is this lock that exists. So when you run a data export, this incomplete lock file will get placed into that directory, and only once the data export completely saves all the files for its export to the directory will it then delete this file from that directory. So if your computer suddenly freezes while it's in the middle of a data export running, then this file will stay there until it starts again, and then it will then try to download all of its data, and only once it's successfully finished downloading all the data will it remove that file. This is just a text file, so you can manually delete this file yourself, but you've got to be very careful about if you delete it, then the data stored here may be in an incomplete state, and because of that, you may get data missing from being exported if other data exports are configured to read from these files. So it's an important point to note when you've got dependencies where multiple data exports are depending on reading from the same set of files here. Now, it is highly recommended when you set up this setting, the save HTTP response data to a folder, that you set different file names for different data export. So if I'm using the products export here to save product data, then in the categories data export, if you're downloading category data to the same directory, then you would at least want to give the file name a different prefix that starts with. Or a much better idea is to set a different folder for where that data is being downloaded. Otherwise, that lock file indicator may be causing a complete set of data that has been downloaded completely, for, say, for category data, to incorrectly being flagged as that it is an incomplete data set. So it's recommended to set up different folders for different data exports that you're setting up within the generic adapter. So for example, here, I might have another file called downloaded category data, which is completely separate from where the product data is being downloaded from. Now, another strategy is that for some generic adapter data exports, they have the dependencies on multiple data exports running. So for example, when we download product data, if the product cell unit data export is also configured, then that data gets downloaded first, then the products data export then gets called. So in the product cell units, we could actually configure that to download and save the file from the web servers for that data export, then for the products export, then to locally read from all the files stored from the product cell units data export. In that case, we only make requests to get one complete record set from the web service for that data export, then this one leverages the exact same data. So that's useful when a web service such as Squizz.com, it includes both the product cell unit data as well as the product data itself in the one set of data coming back from the web service. So we don't need to make the same duplicate calls to the web service to run both of these exports. Now, it's important to note that when a data export runs, it's configured, it will delete all the files out of its directory that start with the same file name. So if I run the products data export again, all these files would then get wiped, and then it would start writing those files back to the directory again. So it's important that if you are using this and you are dealing with large data sets that are in the gigabytes of sizes, that you have enough disk space on your computer, since you're downloading all this data to that computer. If you run out of disk space, then you're going to have a world of pain, not just from getting exports in and out, but many other applications that are running on it. So it's important to make sure that you have enough space on your disk to be able to allow this data to be exported out. And that could occur if you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of products or hundreds of thousands of prices. It may take many gigabytes of data that may be stored on your computer. So it's something that is most of the time only an issue when you're dealing with very large systems that return lots of data. If you no longer wish for a data export to save its downloaded data from a web service to the file system, all we need to do is simply remove the value within the save HTTP response data folder, set that back to blank, and click the save settings button. And now, because that is empty, the data export would no longer try to save any data to the file system. So that's the new setting that we've added to the generic adapter, and it is very helpful for when you are using web services that allow data to be downloaded in the JSON, XML, or CSV data formats, where you can then save them to a computer. That can be used for diagnostics to check that the correct data has been downloaded or last downloaded when the data export ran, as well as for when multiple data exports need to be using the same set of data. They only need to make a request once to a web service to download all that data, and then we can leverage all that data, this exact same data, for then exporting to the corresponding e-commerce platforms that are configured for each of the different adapters. Within the Connector's 1.22 release, we've added a new feature to the generic adapter that enables organizations to be able to automatically send invoices back to their customers. If we look at this diagram here, when a customer wanted to buy products or goods or services off a supplier, they may raise a purchase order first within their own system, or they may raise an order within a given website. So in our example here, Quickie-Mart is going to be our customer for this demonstration, and they have created a purchase order against a supplier account that they've created in their own system. So a supplier account is also known as a creditor, and it may also be called a vendor, depending on the system that they use for their business. So in the standards and Squizz.com, as well as the Connector, we call them the supplier accounts. And in this example, their purchase order then would flow through across into Squizz.com or another website, from where it will be then converted into a sales order for the supplying organization. When that sales order gets raised, of course, it would be raised against a customer account. So this is the opposite of a supplier account. A customer account registers sales that have been made between customers, And these are also known as debtors, customers, business partners, depending on which system a supplying organization would use. So once we've got our sales order created, the sales order will then go down through into the connector software, where it can then be imported into a supplying organization's business system. So the connector has the job of making sure that that sales order goes in, and within the sales order there may be links back to the originating purchase order where that had come from, or the links to a future purchase order that is being created. So a purchase order number is a classic example of a piece of data that gets put into the sales order for the supplying organization system. So what we've done in the connector now is we've built a routine that can then look at the sales orders that have been created in the supplying organization's business system, and then try to find the associated invoices that would then get created off those sales orders. If the donut factory is the supplying organization, that sales order would be converted into an invoice. So in the standards, we call this a customer invoice, and the invoice is raised against a customer account. That would be the same customer account if Squizz.com was being used that was synchronized to that system. So the customer invoice is linked to the customer account, and that sales order is also linked to the customer account. Those are two linkages. So what the connector can do now is our routine, we can say for a given sales order, we want to find the associated customer invoice. We'll perform an invoice query into the associated business system that the supplier is running, and then we can find the invoices, and then we can now send them back to the originating customer. So when this routine runs, the connector software will send the customer invoice back into Squizz.com, and Squizz.com can pass this across to the customer organization. And when that happens, it gets converted into a supplier invoice. So now that that supplier invoice is being created, Squizz.com then can automatically then push it back down into the originating business system of the customer, which in this example is Quickie-Mart. So that purchase order will still live within Quickie-Mart system, and then it can then reference back to the invoice that tells the customer that a payment needs to be made to pay for the goods and services that they have previously ordered. So within the connector software, the routine that we've added can automatically retrieve the customer invoices from the supplier's own business system, and then it can retrieve them, send them back, and through Squizz.com, we can then have them automatically then flow all the way back into the customer system as a supplier invoice. So this is a very powerful feature for the customer because they no longer have to do the double keying of the invoices back into their own system, and that can free up time and money and also the errors that occur. And once those invoices being created, then the payments can be made back into the donut factory against the associated customer account. So to see how this works in reality, within the generic adapter, I've got an example adapter set up here for the donut factory to be able to talk to its own business system software. So if we click on the settings button, within the generic adapter settings window, if we click on the data routines, there is a new routine type that has been set up. It's called the Squizz.com reconcile and send customer invoices. So clicking on that, and if you click the create button, that will allow a new routine to be created for this. An example of how to call this is the type of customer or the customer that you want to send the invoices back to. So we may put in customer is the Quickie-Mart, and we might call it invoice sending. It's a good name. And then we'll click the save button. Now I've already pre-configured one here, so let's just load this up. So this routine has a number of settings to determine how it sends the invoices back to the customer system. So if we go through some of these settings, one, we've got an invoice sending timeout. So when we get the connector to send these invoices back out, how long should it take before it gives up a response from the Squizz.com platform for processing that invoice? And typically it would take a lot less than 60 seconds in order for Squizz.com to forward the invoice on. But this is a number to cater for extremely slow internet connections or very, very big invoices that contain many lines. Now, the next thing we need to specify is the identifier of the customer account that we want to send invoices back for. So if we go back to the connector, we can look at an example sales order. It would have the identifier of the customer we want to automatically send invoices back for. So in this case, there's the customer that has its own ID of 1. Now note that the identifier, the unique identifier for a customer account, may be different from the customer account code, which is the human known identifier of an account, whereas this identifier may be created in the back end of a business system and no human needs to know about. So we need to use that identifier within our routine. Then the next thing we can optionally do is we want to only match orders on where there's a certain piece of text at the start of the instruction field. So I put in this word called testing because I just want to test sending back invoices for one sales order as opposed for all sales orders that are within the connector. So that's why that text is there. If that's left blank, then it will try to send all invoices for all sales orders that have been raised against this adapter which this routine is running for. So we'll just put testing back in there for now. Now, optionally, when this routine runs, it sends back these invoices, we can optionally choose for it to send an email notification saying how this routine ran, which invoices it automatically sent back, which ones failed to send back for which orders, and that report becomes very useful to know what may be holding up an invoice getting sent from the supplier system. So if we change that to true, then when this routine runs, it will send back an email notification. And then we'll need to specify who we want that email notification to go to, who would be the from email address. And you can also do comma delimited list of addresses if you want this report to go back to multiple people. And the other part is this setting here just determines when a request is first made to send an invoice. The routine needs to create a session. Only on extremely slow connections should it take more than 30 seconds for that to establish. So that's another large number there just to make sure that we're not waiting forever for a response. And this timeout does get hit, then that'll typically mean that there's a networking issue or an issue with this computer being able to access the internet or the Squizz.com platform itself. For now, we won't put on the email notification, we'll keep that off. Now, the other part that we need to know is what is the identifier of the organization in Squizz.com that is the customer that is going to receive these invoices. So I've already put in the ID of the organization who is customer, and we can find that out within Squizz.com. We go into our organizations, and if Donut Factory is the supplying organization in this example, they would have need to set up a relationship with the customer organization. So Quickie Mart is the customer, and they would have had assigned their customer account to the Quickie Mart organization, as we can see here. And we can see the identifier of the Quickie Mart here. This is where I'm getting that identifier from. And so we need to plug that into here. So that way, any invoice sent is going to be sent to specifically this organization. Now, if the Quickie Mart has many supplying accounts against the supplier organization, then we would also have to specify a code of which supplier account in their system these invoices need to be raised against. If there's only one supplier account, we can leave this empty and Squizz.com will find the relevant account. So once all those credentials have been set up, now we can then run the routine. So if we take in our example, we have one sales order in here, which is assigned to the Donut Factory's generic adapter, which this routine is going to run against. And for this sales order, it is going to try to find any invoices within the Donut Factory's system that match the purchase order number, which is set here. So PO2 is the purchase order number. It needs to be set against any invoices that this sales order has been generated from. So it uses this in order to look up the invoices, the purchase order number. Then within the lines within the order, it is going to try to match up each of the lines in the invoices to make sure that we can find all the quantities that have been invoiced for the originating sales order. So there may be multiple invoices in the supplier system for one sales order, and that could happen because there's back ordering occurring, so not everything that was ordered originally by the customer is available at the time. So then a back order would need to be raised for maybe certain products, and then once they have been delivered to the supplier, then the associated invoice just covering those back orders can then be separately invoiced. So there may be one or more invoices for a given sales order. So we use this information here, the purchase order line code, to match up the lines across multiple invoices. So this routine makes sure that we do not miss any invoices for sales orders that have come through the connector software. So it's reconciling to make sure that all invoices have been sent back to the customer. So once we have sales orders against the adapter that this routine is running for, then for each of those sales orders, it can then start to do a lookup to find the invoices. And it does that through the count inquiry invoicing data exports. So also in the adapter that is running the routine, the customer account record invoices and customer account record invoice lines, data exports need to be set up. So that way the connector knows where to find the invoices from. Now, you can also instead use the routing, and you can instead tell it this routine to not get the data from the invoice data exports that are configured for its adapter. Instead, route them to a different adapter. So that allows us to get invoices from any of the adapters being set up in a given connector. So we may have the generic adapter here that's controlling the donut factory, but that may then route the request across into the micronet distribution adapter, which can actually be used to find the invoices within that specific system. So that we can use the data routing to our advantage for this invoicing routine. So let's now run the routine. Within the adapter export schedule window, if we click on the routines tab, it will now see the name of our routines that have been set up. So if we then run this, click the run once off button, that will then run this routine. And it may take a bit of time for this routine to run, depending on how many sales orders exist in the connector and how many invoices need to be sent across to the customer via Squizz.com. So if that takes a long time, you may get a connection timeout issue, but the routine will continue to run into the background. And once it's finished, if we look in the connector messages, it will notify us of any invoices that have been sent. So as we can see here, it is advised that a supplier invoice with the code SIN-3-FQP was created based on the invoice for that sales order that we had in the connector. Now, if we go into Squizz.com, it will also raise a notification within the supplying organization if we are assigned to the sales order notification category, which will look like this, advising that the invoice for the sales order has been sent and with the invoice number that it has found. So as you can see here, it has found the invoice with the identifier 1. In most systems, that would be a far longer value, such as it may be 1001653. And then we can also see the customer account that the invoice was sent to and the organization that the invoice was sent to. In this case, it is the Quickie Mart and the total for that invoice. Now, from the customer's perspective, they will receive a notification in the purchasing organization category. And that will look very similar, telling us what the invoice is, the amount, and the supplier account that that invoice has been applied to, as well as whether or not the invoice was successfully sent back to the customer's own system via the connector or any software that is configured to listen for the invoicing. Now, if all has gone well, that will then tell you yes, and it's advising that the invoice was successfully sent back into the customer's system. Now, we can also view the details of this invoice if we click on here and what it looks like. So we can see the billing and delivery addresses that Squizz.com has then also saved as a reference, and then the lines that exist within that invoice and any totals that was set against that invoice. So that provides a full circle from when sales orders come into the connector software, the point where invoices are then raised against those sales orders and sent back out of the connector software back through Squizz.com to the customer's own system with minimal manual data entry required. Now, when the routine is successfully sent back an invoice against a sales order, in the invoice number field, it will then provide the identifier of the invoice that was sent back. And then if there are no more invoices for that sales order it can find or needs to find because all the lines match up, then it will put this text to denote that the sales order has been fully invoiced and requires no further sending out of invoices. So if there were multiple invoices sent, then this will contain a list. So maybe we might have a second invoice and we might even have a third invoice. And it may even have some kind of prefix, such as INV3. Then they would be all comma delimited into this field. Now you may have it that only 2 of the 3 invoices could be sent out, and then that fully invoiced text would not be there, and the connector will continue to look for invoices for the sales order until this text here is placed in this invoice number field. So once it's there, then the connector would no longer try to find any more invoices. So we can either manually put that text in to tell the connector to stop looking for invoices for the sales order, or we can wait for the routine to place that text there, which will also achieve the same objective. Now, if we go back to the routines, now at any time you can look at the history to see the invoices if the routine successfully ran, and if the invoices that got sent out, and if any failures occurred, then you'll be able to see that within the history log there. Now, if the customer is also using the connector software to import the invoices back into their own system, then they may appear in the supplier invoice tab here. So then we can go and look at the details of the supplier invoice from the customer's perspective. It should look fairly similar. We've got the same data that is appearing within the lines. And the only thing that is really different here is that the invoice code is the identifier of the invoice that Squizz generated, but it also has the originating supplier's invoice code, which is here. So we have multiple references as well as the originating purchase order number. So that way we've got these 3 references to be able to reconcile and track where this invoice came from. Now, this routine may not pick up invoices for sales orders due to several reasons. One, that an invoice doesn't exist for the sales order, or maybe data is missing against the sales order. If we change this sales order, the one that we previously had sent, we'll clear this field because we want to try to send invoices for it again, but this time we'll remove the purchase order number. And we still got the word testing there because we only want to send invoices for orders that have that word, but in the future we could remove that. So we'll save that order and we'll try to run the routine again. Once the routine is completed, if we look back in the message logs, if no invoices were found against any sales orders, then we would see a message either such as no orders were found here, or it would be advising that it couldn't find any invoices for the specific sales order. So we can get lots of different information within the connector messages, as well as within the email report that would advise us when those issues occur. Now, if we had the send report notification email turned on and we had our email addresses set up, when the routine completes, it will then try to send the report based on the email settings set up against this adapter, which can be found by clicking on the adapter button. And then within the email settings section, then we can set all the details of the SMTP server that the connector needs to use to send out the email via. And there's a whole bunch of settings there to be able to configure that correctly. When that email gets sent out, it will look like this, where it provides an overall summary of how many sales orders were attempted to find invoices for, then how many invoices that the routine was able to send out back to the customer system, and how many sales orders were then fully invoiced and no longer need to be invoiced any further. After that, it will show each of the sales orders in the connector software that is then trying to find the invoices for and the results of those checks that it was trying to do. And if there's any issues, such as it can't find an invoice or the lines don't fully match up, meaning that not all the lines across all the invoices it found match up with the originating sales order, then it will notify which lines that still need to be invoiced. So this report is the reconciliation report, and then this can be used in order to determine why certain quantities of products haven't been invoiced yet, if they got missed, such as the warehouse staff mispacking or sending off a specific line in an invoice, or the goods are still on back order waiting to be sent. So it's a report that ensures higher integrity when is sending out ordered products and goods and services to make sure that everything lines up. So this routine has both 2 objectives: to send out the invoices that it can, as well as the goods and services being delivered that were originally ordered by the customer. For more details on how this routine works, go to the squizz.com/docs/connector and go to the generic adapter help page. If you scroll down to the adapter routines section, you will then find details of the routines that the adapter supports, and then you can click on the link in order to then view the page that contains all the details of this reconcile and send customer invoice, as well as all the error messages, how the routine works in more detail, and things you need to look for when you're setting it up. So this routine looks to help both customers and supplying businesses to help automate the trading that goes on between the 2 organizations by leveraging the Squizz.com platform's functionality and its ability to talk to both systems in order to transfer the invoicing data around. And that's a wrap up of the 1.22 connector release. For more information about the connector, you can go to the squizz.com/docs/connector to find the connector documentation, where you can find more details about the changes we've made to other versions, as well as in-depth details on how to configure the connector. Till next time, thanks for listening. Have a great day.